Okay, so I'm going to show you the track, the center modeling procedure that I'm going to use. I'll just show you this diagram first. You can see that what I do is I lay down this 20 thou sheet at 14 millimeters wide down the center on top of these Delrin wood or PC board ties. I just CA it on top of the tie. That way it gives me more options when I'm moving around this right angle with solvent to slide it around, get it lined up, and so on. And then I run a little spacer between here and the right angle, a 1/16 balsa sheet piece, which is just a little bit larger than the NMRA gauge flange width, which is good, right? Like a little bit larger, like this gap right here. You don't want this right angle tight against the NMRA gauge and the rail. I mean, you can, but sometimes you might have issues with other wheel sets, fatter wheel sets or wheels out of gauge or whatever. You know, like that type of thing. I always like to build in a little bit of tolerance there, okay? And then essentially what you make here, and I'm going to show you, is a tray. And then you just fill it with golden coarse molding paste or pumice gel, or, you know, there's 5 or 6 different types. You can use texture paste, but I'm probably going to go with what I have here. And I can dye that gray and then fill it in like concrete, and it'll harden nice acrylic. It dries fast. And I'll pre-paint this rust first, right? And we'll see how that turns out. I think it's going to turn out pretty good. This code 70 rail too, so you can, like, code 83 will be fine too, because this is taller. Like, this is pretty much to scale right here. This right angle sits just a little bit above the rail, but that's okay though. But if you got code 83, it's a little bit taller, so it'll be perfect. Number 291. Okay? And then you can see here, this piece is loose, right? It's a 291 angle, and what I'm doing is I'm just gluing it like an inch or two at a time, and I'm using the spacer right here, okay, to push it against. So take some of this solvent, and I'll just put a bead under here, okay, and then just tuck it up tight against there, that balsa sheet, so you get a nice consistent gap. Okay, so we have the final spline or gluing plate cut now and rough sanded with 60 thou on both sides to give it some tooth so the CA can grab nice when I glue it down onto these ties. Mind you, in this case there's a lot of styrene ties here, so I could actually use a big bead of solvent to glue this down, which is what I might do anyway. And then just a touch of CA on the copper ties. So the one thing that you want to make sure that you get here is that this is centered, because these points here are going to go back and forth here, so it needs to clear that plate, like the bottom flange of the rail. Okay. Okay, so I just want to briefly mention this part about the balsa. This was a bit of an experiment because this long point rail isn't soldered. Yeah, it's soldered right here. So I needed it to be flexible. So that's why I ran this balsa. It's a very thin, tricky thing to do in plastic. And I wasn't sure if it would be flexible enough, whereas the balsa was, but it turns out it didn't matter in the end. So furthermore, it's easier for me to shim up this plastic. I can squeeze, I can crush the balsa and push it back a ways in order to purchase my gauge clearance. I wouldn't be able to do that with plastic, see? Because this balsa has varathane on it, remember how I mentioned how CA, especially thin CA, just attacks this stuff aggressively and glues like beautifully. Like if you ever want to glue plastic to balsa or any wood with CA, put a coat of varathane on it and watch it grab like it's not coming off. Because, you know, CA can dry up and crack and break away easily, right? But if you can see it here, I can actually shape this line here. I wouldn't recommend this if you got to do a yard. But this is only one case here, so I'm just going to fix it this way, and I can squeeze that, and at least I'll get this nice little flange area cleaned up and looking nice and straight. But you can see how I can crush that and squeeze that. See that nice gap now? I was able to compress that balsa. I wouldn't have been able to do that with plastic. So now I got a nice clean taper there, going to far enough down the point rail where the clearance will just blend in with the rest of the rail as it moves back and forth on both sides here. Tricky stuff. If you love modeling, though, it's the kind of stuff that you really like to do, but not too much of, right? Okay. Okay, so I just want to address this issue here with the center gluing plate down a curved section of track like this. Like somebody had asked, how do you cut that piece? Like, do you actually do a paper rub? Well, you can, like I established these curves on the outside parts. I do a big paper rub and trace it and then cut through the line over the balsa, or you can pre-cut it and run the knife up against it and then just touch it, with a longer board sander to get it, tweak it. And then with balsas, because balsa wood is soft, you can actually push it into the track, right? It'll bend in, and like that's another reason why I like balsa. Even if this line is not perfect, if you glue it from one side, like this was trickier doing the centerpiece, but the ones on the outside, like would be this one over here, it's not as crucial. But anyway, that's why I like balsa, because it can compress easily and you can remedy those kinds of things. Now, with a piece like this, you can see I cut a strip 14 millimeters wide. You can see that it doesn't fit in there, obviously. Now, what you can do is you can just lay this on here roughly and then just do some relief cuts. Like cut through about 90% of the plastic, preferably over top of a tie if you can, but it really doesn't matter because the whole piece is going to get CA'd to the top of these Delrin ties anyway. So what I'll do here is I'll think, okay, so there's the apex of the curve there. I'm running into it here. So I'm going to put a cut right there. And then I can just turn it like this and say, okay, I can make a run straight down here to about here. I'm going to put a cut right here. And then maybe one more here and then one here. So 1, 2, 3, 4 cuts down to about 80% of the width of this, and just tweak it and it'll bend and fit into place. And then when you lay your right angle, you just run in a strip all the way along and it's not going to matter, right? Okay. Okay, so you can see I just put a relief cut here, 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 and here. There's 4. And then when I lay it in here like this, you can see how they open up there. I can basically just lay that in and it fits in there nice without having to cut a curved piece. Okay, so now before I glue this down, make sure I rough up both sides of the styrene, right? Because it promotes greater adhesion with the choice of cement that you use. And also these Delrin ties, as you can see this stick, like you see how I made these sticks and I folded it around one side? Why didn't I do this two sides? Because sometimes I want to run against a rail. I don't want to sand the rail, do I? Like if I want to sand down this surface here, well, I don't want to be grinding into my rail, so I leave that clean. See, I can flip it around and do either, right? So on 2 sides. And here I can use this to rough up these ties, most notably the Delrin ones, by adding tooth, right? Because, why? CA is a mechanical bond. It needs something to grip to. Even if it's not a very pliable surface, if you rough it up, even with metal, like if you glue 2 pieces of aluminum together with CA or brass photo etch to plastic, it's always a good idea to scratch up and rough up the brass and the plastic if you're going to use CA mechanical bond, right? Okay. Be careful that you don't get onto the tie with your throw bar. Like leave the 2 outside ones like no glue. And I don't glue onto the 2 outside ties or the throw bar, obviously. Just the next one to it. And be careful you don't stick your finger over the gap where the glue squeezes through and glues your finger to the model. Yes, I've done that before, and I know a lot of you probably have. That's kind of embarrassing, isn't it, when you're all alone? Oops, I glued my finger to the model. Or you leave a big fingerprint. Okay, so you can choose to airbrush this. I like to paint the trays first, but actually with these turnouts I just actually painted it by hand. A couple coats of Vallejo rust. I like this one here. 71.080 rust. They got quite a few rust colors, but I like the darker rust color for starters. And I just paint it by hand. Paint the top of the right angle, because that'll get masked off when you apply the coarse molding paste. Okay, so as you can see, I'm peeling off the tape. You can see this center island, how it turned out. Really nice, actually. Just need to touch up that right angle with the paintbrush a little bit on the top of the edge. Put a bit of wash, of just some darker wash in there, and then I can airbrush in some of the oil streaks from the locomotives, because this is one of the main, this is the main actually to the barge right through here. And you can see this area here. This was also done, but I have to mask this separately. Because it just, I would have had to cut, like I didn't have thin enough tape there. And things can get really messy if you try to rush it and mask the whole deal at once. But you can see there's a couple of slabs there that run up against the point rails there that I went only so far, which is fine because the prototype looks like that. And all the clearances are adequate because they're a little bit larger than the NMRA gauge through here, okay? All the flange troughs here. Okay, so then I'll just mask this off. I mean, I could probably even paint that by hand with a paintbrush. So remember that all of this was done with a standard traditional paintbrush, right? Like I only used the airbrush for this one turnout further up, just to demonstrate that for economy of time, you can save a lot of time if you airbrush. And airbrushing, you usually get one nice smooth coverage, but you're still going to have to touch up though later with a traditional paintbrush, and you know, just turn some of the funny little anomalies of discoloration into erosion and stuff with a wash. Okay. Okay, so here's something I want to show you how to deal with, which happens when we're doing process. You know, you can see here I was working on these two slabs in the center, but I was also working on this part trying to get this done, and so I had to have a mask line here. I don't really want that line there, but because this is covered in a skim of texture paste, it puts a hard sandable coating over the balsa wood where there's also paint underneath. I'll show you how you can fix this, okay? Take a sanding stick with 60 grit. Okay? This just adds more varied texture that's impossible to pick out by hand. Okay? So you can put a dark wash on right away, but in this case, I'm going to add some cement gray, 71.045 cement gray, and then I'll put a darker coat on later on. Just going to lay it across here like this. And who cares if there's variation? That suggests age, right? And repair. Okay, as you can see, I've masked off for all the graphics on the main running through the pavement. And as you can see, I've been very careful. I don't mind spilling earth tone or buff or any kind of brown or even green on my layout, but not yellow. You don't want to spill yellow. She's ready for paint. Okay, so if anything signifies the nearing end of this grueling tutorial, or this particular task on section 1 of River Road, is the painting of the caution zone on the main here. It's all masked, as you can see, and what I've done is you can see there's yellow and white here. Now this is too strong, this is flat yellow, XF3, but I like to add white to everything, as you know. It seems to desaturate a lot of the colors. It gives it a more realistic look, especially when you put lights on it. That's a lot of the problems when we use this color straight from the bottle. That everybody does that, you know, it seems, for the most part, and we want to change that up. We want to lighten them. Okay, it's what I do, and that's part of the reason why the color or the canvas looks the way it does on the model, because I basically fade all my paint, right? Okay, so I'm going to use this color here. You can see it's very faded yellow, and that's what I'm going to use to paint this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave a little less on this outside line, because this is where the loading is on the team track side. So I want to try to build some of that in, like suggest that, because this part of the pavement is actually faded quite a bit. Okay, so what I've done now is I've added a little more yellow to the faded base color, just to bring up a little bit more of the brightness of the yellow just in a few areas here. Okay. Okay, so now I've done a little bit of the brighter yellow modeling. I'm just going to give it a light overspray of white. Very, very light. That's it. Okay, so what I want to do is just lay in some light umber here, like an earth tone umber. And when I say umber, once again, black and brown to your own taste. And then I lighten it with earth, because what I'm going to put here is a little bit of hint of rust, because the rails, like as the wheels and flanges are rubbing up against the inside of the rail, it throws particles, metal shavings and particles as they wear, right? Because steel wears out, and then the rain hits it and it turns that orangey kind of rust, but just on the apex of the curve. And this is the advantage of, you know, an airbrush, is you can get in and do these kind of subtle discolorations to scale. And then what I'm going to finish with is just some light rust like this. That should be enough. Okay, so I would be amiss if I didn't mention about cleaning the top of the rail after all this paint work and flat coating, and right, there's going to be contamination on the top of the rail. So what I do is I take my impregnated eraser with metal particles, right, abrasive rub eraser, okay, and I mask off the outside of the rail here, okay, and then all I do is I just take it and I just rub it along and clean the top of the rail and polish it down. Even if you do go through the tape, which you probably won't, the texture paste is painted gray, and it's gray underneath the texture paste if you did it right, and you don't have any worries. Just don't get too close to the inner right angle, so you strip the paint off of that, but you can mask that too if you want. But that's how I do it, okay?